Hey everybody. So this is going to be part 2 of my video on what is logarithmic footage. The first part concentrated on gamma curves, which is the color that log footage can capture. This video is going to be about dynamic range. So again, this video might not be technically 100% perfect. Like the previous video, I'm doing it just to explain some core concepts. Now, the way I understand it is video cameras can capture 4 or 5 stops of dynamic range. Our Sony FS7 can capture 12 stops of dynamic range. I do believe an Alexa RAW can capture 16 stops. I believe Red Camera can capture 14 stops of dynamic range. For what I'm doing here, 12 stops of dynamic range is more than enough. I have color corrected and done visual effects with ARRI RAW 16-bit footage, and it is truly stunning what that camera can capture. But like everything in life, you get what you pay for. More money equals more dynamic range, but you also want the right tool for the right job. I'm not making the next Marvel movie here. 12 stops of dynamic range on our Sony FS7 is more than enough for what I'm doing. So what is dynamic range? The way I understand it is dynamic range is how much luminance information your camera can capture at a particular f-stop. Now this can get confusing, but I believe the best way to see this is to actually look at it as a practical example. So this video was recorded at Rec 709 with a Canon Cinema Prime lens. If you can ever shoot a Cinema Prime lens, do it. So with Cinema Prime lenses, you don't have f-stops, you have t-stops. Ooh, la-di-da, t-stops. So if you have t-stops on your lenses, what that means is if you put the 24mm lens on and it's t5.6 and you swap out the 85mm lens, it's still going to be t5.6. So this video was shot on our set. So this is an actual chart. It's a color bar chart, a chip chart. It's printed out on a 3 feet by 2 feet-ish card, and we put it on a C-stand, and this is how the engineers and the camera shaders chip our studio cameras. I just borrowed it for a little bit because it really illustrates dynamic range quite well. So let's take a look at the scopes. So this is the plugge right here. Plugge is a fancy word for black. You'll sound really intelligent if you say to your client, I've qualified the plugge in this picture. That should be the blackest black. You can see here it's a little high. This isn't an electronically generated chip chart. It's an actual printed thing on a piece of paper. I exposed it so the highest whites right here would be right at 100. And this was shot at Rec 709 at f5.6. This chip chart might be a little washed out. The colors aren't that saturated, but I'm not really particularly caring about the colors. I'm caring about this black and white information in the middle. Now, this was a proper exposure at 5.6. Watch what happens when I bring it down. You can no longer see the difference between these two blacks right here. You can look at them on the scopes. They're probably right here and right here. So technically there's a little difference, but to my eye, and I'm looking at it on my fancy pants monitor here, to my eye, that's gone. And now that's gone. And now that one is gone. This is shrinking dynamic range. We're losing dynamic range. We're losing the black detail here. And we can go the other way with the whites. Now these two white boxes here, you can no longer see the difference. That third white box, now that's blown out. As I said, Rec 709 has about 4 or 5 stops of dynamic range when you record in it. So I'm going to reset these, and we're going to go over to this clip. Now this was shot in log, and I put this at T11, and I couldn't figure out why there was such a big 2-stop difference between the log and the Rec 709. And I realized this much later, but the shutter speed on the two settings on the camera, the log setting and the Rec 709 setting, was different, which could account for some of this difference. And the other part was, when I shoot log footage in the camera, it looks like this. So what does this mean? I don't know. These are probably whites. These are probably blacks. This is where it gets a little confusing when you shoot log. So in my video camera, I have scopes, and I have to put a LUT on. When I put the LUT on in my video camera, I have a Sony S-Log LUT. These whites here were at 1023. So what this means is the LUT on the Sony FS7 camera is a little bit different than the LUT on the Resolve. So now you're going to say, but Mark, I thought you said LUTs are for wimps. Well, they are for wimps. But I want to compare the log shot with the Rec 709 shot. And really, the only way to do that successfully is to put a LUT on the log shot so we can bring it to the same color space as Rec 709. So this is our shot in log with the LUT on it. And I had the color corrected a little bit to account for that difference in shutter speed. And this shot was shot in Rec 709. If you look at the scopes, They're pretty close. It's going to be a little different because the colors are recorded differently in log than they are in Rec 709. And also, this LUT might not exactly be matching up with this Rec 709 footage. And again, we can come in here to this log footage and we can start to bring down our lift. And you can see again, just like the Rec 709 footage, that's gone. And now those are gone. And now those are gone. Let me reset that. So the dynamic range is the distance between this black or this pluged bar and this white bar. Now, we really haven't seen much of a difference yet. This looks an awful lot like this. The colors are a bit different. Again, that's log versus Rec 709, but the dynamic range is pretty much the same. This is the log footage, and that's the Rec 709 footage. I can do a wipe between them. They're pretty close. Color's a little bit off. That's just because of the difference between log and Rec 709. But look at the dynamic range. Pretty close. The log footage is in the bottom, and the Rec 709 stuff is on the top. You can see the LUT fights me. I can't get the match perfectly because the LUT is restricting me. But I'm not so hung up on colors. I'm just trying to show you the difference between log and Rec 709, the dynamic range. Now, let's take a look at something overexposed. This was shot on Rec 709, and I opened it up 4 stops. So this is T1.5 on that lens. It's 4 stops overexposed. Now let's watch what happens when we try to bring some of that white down a bit. So you can see all that's blown out. That is gone. The highlights, it's gone, and it's not coming back. So if I bring it all the way down to here, look at where our colors stop. Here's Rec 709 exposed properly. You can see the black here and the white here. And on this one, we start to lose it right about here. Our colors are also messed up. That's not supposed to be purple. It's supposed to be black and white. But this image shot in Rec 709 is pretty much going to be useless. If you look at the scopes, all this detail is now blown out. So let's look at this shot. This is our log footage, and this was shot 4 stops open at 2.8. Again, because of the shutter speed difference, the log was at f11, not f5.6. Try not to get too hung up on that. So this is log right out of the camera. I'm going to put my last node, a LUT on this, my Rec 709 LUT. Okay, that made it look even worse. I'm going to now start to correct this. I'm going to start by bringing down my gain. Wow. I'm going to bring down my lift. And I'm going to bring down my gamma. Color corrected, it was a bit magenta-y. And that's probably good enough for demo purposes. Now, this is the power of shooting log. This was exposed, this was shot in logarithmic at f2.8. And it originally looked like this. With the LUT on, meaning bending those curves back into Rec 709 space, it looked like that. Even worse. But because our dynamic range is so high, meaning how much the camera can record between the blackest black, the pluged, which is right here, and the whitest white right here, is 12 stops, I can color correct this to look like this. Let's take a look at our Rec 709 that was overexposed by 4 stops. That's as good as we're going to get it. Notice all the detail here is gone. All the detail here is gone. This is the log shot. Shot 4 stops overexposed with the Rec 709 LUT put on, and I can color correct it, and I get all that detail back. Now, obviously, you wouldn't want to shoot it this overexposed, but my point is, this is a great example of dynamic range. When people say footage has a large dynamic range, or you can shoot 12 stops of dynamic range, this is what they're talking about. This is what 4 stops of dynamic range will give you. This is what 12 stops of dynamic range will give you. So you can see, shooting in log is much more forgiving. Now, what you're basically saying to me now is, but Mark, we don't shoot chip charts, we shoot sets and people. Okay, fine. This is our around town set. It's not quite finished yet, but it is lit. So this was shot on Rec 709, 4 stops over at T1.3. Let me bring down the gain. Not much we're going to be able to do to save this shot. It's overexposed. And that's that. Now, let's look at the same shot, same lens, shot in log. This is shot at 2.8. 4 stops overexposed. I'm going to put the LUT on this. Oh, it made it even worse. Well, watch what happens when I bring down the lift and the gamma. All my detail is there. We're losing some of the monitor right here, is pinned right here. So you can pin and blow out stuff in log, but it's really hard to do. So I hope that kind of cleared up what dynamic range is. In log, you have a lot more of it. Now, again, it's no excuse not to expose properly, not to set your f-stops or your t-stops, if you have a big shot lens like we do, properly. The point is, there's a lot more information in log, a lot more color information, as I showed in the first video, and a lot more dynamic range, which is what I showed in this video. So what does this mean for a practical sense? If you watch some of the other videos I've done, you'll be able to watch me pull details out of really, really bright parts. And the other way around, you'll be able to see me pull details out of really, really dark parts. That's what dynamic range gives you. To quickly recap, this is overexposed in Rec 709 by 4 stops. Pretty much everything at the top end is blown out. No more detail left. This was shot at T2.8 in log space. That's what the camera original looked like, and this is what it looks like after I corrected it. All those details, all those highlights are all successfully brought back. 4 stops overexposed, and I'm able to bring everything back, no problem. This is what dynamic range does for you. Lots of details that you can bring out. So you wouldn't want to shoot like this on a regular basis, that overexposed or that underexposed, but knowing that you'll have that detail there for log really helps you. So I hope you guys found this video helpful. I told you dynamic range was a little bit easier to see and understand than gamma curves because I can shoot this chip chart and I can overexpose by 4 stops. You guys can really see what's going on. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment box. Do me a favor, subscribe to this channel. I try to put a new video out every week. And happy correcting, everybody.